I found out my family had decided to erase me while I was standing in line at City Hall, holding a manila envelope with my name misspelled on the front. The clerk leaned over the counter, lowered her voice, and said, "You're not listed as an authorized party anymore. I'm sorry." For a second, I honestly thought she was talking to the person behind me. Before I continue, if you've ever been excluded, silenced, or pushed aside by the very people who should have protected you, stay with me. Like the video, leave a comment if this feels familiar, and subscribe. This story doesn't start with screaming. It starts with paperwork. My name is Natalie Brooks. I was 31 years old at the time, and I worked as a senior compliance analyst for a mid-sized nonprofit healthcare network in Northern California. I handled audits, regulatory filings, risk assessments. I was the person organizations called when they were afraid of making a mistake that could cost them millions. And yet, that morning, I was being told I no longer existed in my own family's most important decision. The envelope in my hands contained documents related to my grandmother's assisted living placement. Or at least, that's what I had been told. My mother, Karen Brooks, had asked me to come down to City Hall to help finalize guardianship paperwork. She said it casually over the phone, the way she always did when she needed something done but didn't want to sound like she was asking. "You're good with this stuff," she'd said. "And your brother's busy." My brother, Daniel Brooks, was always busy. Busy being praised, busy being trusted, busy being treated like the default adult in every room, despite the fact that he was 2 years younger than me and had never managed anything more complex than his own mortgage. The clerk slid the papers back across the counter. "Only Karen Brooks and Daniel Brooks are listed," she repeated. "If you want access, they'll need to amend the filing." I stepped aside, my face calm, my pulse steady. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I watched. That was the first moment I understood something irreversible had already happened without me. I left City Hall and sat in my car for a full 10 minutes before starting the engine. I replayed the last few weeks in my head, not emotionally, but methodically, the way I would review a failed compliance chain at work. The missed calls, the vague answers, the way my mother had stopped looping me into conversations and started informing me after decisions were made. My grandmother, Eleanor Whitman, was 87 years old. She had raised me for long stretches of my childhood when my parents were working or fighting or doing whatever it was they did when they weren't paying attention. She was sharp, opinionated, stubborn, and very clear about one thing. She did not trust Daniel. She'd said it plainly just 6 months earlier, sitting across from me at her kitchen table in Modesto, stirring her tea with hands that still barely shook. "Your brother means well," Eleanor had said, "but he listens to whoever talks last, and your mother talks last." Eleanor Whitman had also been very clear that she wanted me involved in any decisions about her care. She had said my name, out loud, more than once. So why wasn't I on the paperwork? When I got home, my phone buzzed with a text from Karen. "All done? We'll fill you in later." That was the sentence that cracked something open. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the public guardianship filing system. I knew how these things worked. Transparency was baked into the process. Anyone could see who filed, when, and with what authority. The documents were there. Filed 3 days earlier. Petitioner, Karen Brooks. Co-petitioner, Daniel Brooks. Emergency temporary authority requested. My name appeared nowhere. Not as an alternate, not as a notified party, not even as next of kin, despite the fact that I lived 20 minutes from Eleanor and had taken her to every medical appointment for the past 4 years. My hands rested flat on the desk. I felt cold, but not shocked. Shock is for surprises. This was pattern recognition. Growing up, Daniel had always been framed as the one with potential. I was the one with responsibility. He broke things. I fixed them. He got forgiven. I got relied on. When I graduated with a master's degree in public health compliance, my mother told people I was good with forms. When Daniel switched careers for the 3rd time, she told everyone he was finding himself. At holidays, I was seated at the kids' table until I was 25. Daniel was never asked to bring anything. I was asked to bring everything. And somehow, without ever being discussed directly, I had become optional. That evening, I drove to Eleanor's assisted living facility. I didn't tell anyone. I just showed up. She was sitting by the window, watching the parking lot, the way she always did. When she saw me, her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You look like someone moved furniture without asking," she said. "They did," I replied. "Legally." I told her everything, slowly, carefully. No accusations, just facts. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded once. "So they finally did it," she said. "Did what?" "Decided you were inconvenient," she replied. "You ask too many questions." I swallowed. "Did you sign anything?" "No," Eleanor said sharply. "I told your mother I wanted you there. She said you were busy." I laughed then, not because it was funny, because it was precise. Eleanor reached for my hand. "Natalie," she said, "I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Pay attention," she said. "Because once people start excluding you on paper, they're already planning what comes next." I drove home in silence. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone had 3 missed calls from Daniel. I didn't answer because I knew, deep in my chest, that whatever explanation he was about to give me would not be the truth. It would be management. And I had spent my entire career dismantling systems built on quiet manipulation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the opening move, and they had made it without realizing who they were dealing with. The next morning, Daniel Brooks showed up at my apartment without calling first. I knew it was him before I opened the door. He knocked. I opened the door and stepped aside without inviting him in. He came anyway. Daniel looked the same as he always did when he wanted something. Concerned, slightly defensive, already rehearsing a version of events where he was reasonable and I was difficult. "Natalie," he said, hands up, palms open. "Before you freak out." "I'm not freaking out," I said. "I'm listening." That threw him off. He hesitated, then leaned against the counter like he owned the place. "Mom didn't mean to leave." "Faster for who?" I asked. "For the process," he replied quickly. "City Hall stuff is a mess. You know that." I did know that. Which is how I knew his explanation was nonsense. "They filed an emergency petition," I said calmly. "That requires justification. What was the emergency?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Grandma's getting worse." "In what way?" I asked. "Be specific." He shrugged. "She forgets things." "She forgot your name last week?" I asked. He didn't answer. "She forgot mine?" I continued. "No," he said. "But she forgot how to manage her finances?" I asked. "No." "She forgot she wanted me involved?" I asked. That landed. Daniel straightened. "Look, Mom didn't want to overwhelm you." There it was. The phrase that had been used my entire life. Overwhelm. As if my competence were a liability. "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice even. "Did you read the petition before you signed it?" He hesitated. Just a second too long. "Mom handled most of it," he said. "I trusted her." "Of course he did." I nodded. "Did you notice the clause that gives you joint authority over her medical and financial decisions?" He blinked. "What clause?" I watched the realization creep across his face. Slow. Uncomfortable. "Did you know that petition allows you to override Eleanor's stated preferences?" I asked. Daniel swallowed. "That's not what we're doing." "It's what the paperwork does," I replied. "Intent doesn't matter." He ran a hand through his hair. "You're reading into this." "No," I said. "I'm reading it." That silence stretched. Then he tried something else. "You always assume the worst," he said, his tone sharpening. "Mom's just trying to keep things together." "By cutting me out?" I asked. "She didn't cut you out," he snapped. "She just didn't include you." I looked at him. Really looked at him. "That's the same thing," I said. Daniel scoffed. "This is why she didn't want you involved. You make everything complicated." That was the moment. Not the filing. Not the clerk at City Hall. This, the casual way he framed my presence as a problem. "I'm going to ask you one last question," I said. "Did Eleanor agree to this?" He didn't answer. "Did she agree?" I repeated. Daniel looked away. "She didn't object." "That's not consent," I said. He pushed off the counter. "You're blowing this up." "No," I replied. "I'm seeing it clearly." He left shortly after, muttering something about calling Mom. I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, my breath steady, my thoughts sharp. This wasn't about guardianship. It was about control. And now I knew exactly who was holding it. At work, I did what I always did when something didn't add up. I pulled records. Not illegally, not emotionally. Public filings, medical power of attorney histories, previous amendments Eleanor had made over the years. I knew her patterns. She changed documents carefully, always with witnesses, always with explanations. 2 years earlier, she had updated her healthcare directive. My name was listed first, Karen second. Daniel? Nowhere. That directive had not been referenced in the emergency petition. That omission was not accidental. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Her name was Patricia Hale, an elder law attorney in Sacramento, recommended by a colleague who owed me a favor after I'd helped her organization survive a surprise audit. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Your mother filed an emergency petition without notifying an interested party. That's a problem." "How big?" I asked. "Big enough to challenge," she replied. "But timing matters." "Why?" I asked. "Because once temporary authority becomes permanent, courts get reluctant to reverse it," she said. "Especially when families frame dissent as emotional." I closed my eyes. Emotional. Again. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "First," Patricia said, "we document everything. Second, we talk to your grandmother. Third, we prepare for pushback." "I'm already getting that," I said. Patricia paused. "Natalie, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Do you think your mother is acting in your grandmother's best interest?" she said carefully. "Or in her own?" I thought about Karen's text. "All done. We'll fill you in later." "I think she's acting in her own," I said. Patricia exhaled. "Then this won't stay quiet." That evening, Karen called. I answered. Her voice was syrupy, controlled. "Daniel said you were upset." "I'm not upset," I said. "I'm excluded." "You're being dramatic," she replied immediately. I almost smiled. The predictability was comforting. "You filed legal documents without notifying me," I said. "That's not drama." "You don't understand how stressful this is," Karen snapped. "I'm carrying everything." "You didn't ask me to carry it with you," I said. "We didn't have time," she said. "And frankly, you complicate things." There it was again. Complicate. I pictured the years I'd spent making things easier for her. Scheduling appointments, reviewing insurance plans, translating medical jargon. "You didn't want my help," I said slowly. "You wanted my silence." Karen went quiet. Then, colder. "You always think you know better." "I do," I replied, "because this is literally my profession." She laughed sharply. "This isn't work, Natalie. This is family." That word again. Family. Used like a shield. "Then why does it look like a hostile takeover?" I asked. She hung up. I sat in my living room after that. Lights off, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I felt something settle into place. Not anger, clarity. They weren't panicking. They were consolidating. And Eleanor Whitman, sharp as she was being positioned as a justification, not a participant. I opened my laptop and began drafting a timeline. Dates, calls, filings, conversations. At the bottom, I typed a single sentence. If they've already decided I don't belong, then I have nothing to lose by insisting on being seen. The hearing for temporary guardianship confirmation was scheduled in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. They thought I would cool off. They thought I would accept the explanation and stay in my lane. They didn't know I was already preparing to walk straight into a courtroom with documentation, witnesses, and a professional understanding of exactly how systems fail when people think no one is watching. And this time, I wasn't just watching. I was stepping in. The first thing I did was stop answering my mother's calls. Not out of spite, out of discipline. Karen Brooks had a way of steering conversations into circles until the original issue dissolved into tone and intent and hurt feelings. I wasn't going to let this become about how I spoke instead of what they did. Instead, I went to Eleanor Whitman's assisted living facility the next morning with a yellow legal pad and no agenda other than listening. She was already dressed, cardigan buttoned wrong, reading glasses pushed too far down her nose. "You look like you're about to audit me," she said when she saw the pad. "I am," I replied, but gently. She smiled. "Good. Sit." We talked for over an hour. About small things first. The food, the staff, the woman down the hall who sang too loudly at night. Then, slowly, I steered us back. Grandma, I said, did Mom talk to you about guardianship before filing anything? Eleanor set her tea down. She talked, she said. She didn't ask. What did she say? I asked. That it was time to make things official, Eleanor replied. That Daniel was stepping up. That you were busy with work and didn't need more responsibility. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. She framed it like a favor, Eleanor continued. For you. Did you agree? I asked. I said I wanted you involved, Eleanor said. She said we'd talk about it later. Later had already passed. Did she explain what you were signing? I asked. Eleanor looked at me then. Really looked. She didn't bring papers, she said. She said she'd handle it. That was enough. Before I left, Eleanor reached into her nightstand and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of her healthcare directive, her financial power of attorney, and a handwritten note dated 6 months earlier. Natalie, to be notified of all decisions. No exceptions. It was signed. Witnessed. Karen Brooks had ignored it. That afternoon, Patricia Hale called me back. I've reviewed the filing, she said. There are procedural gaps. How bad? I asked. Bad enough that a judge will have questions, she replied, especially if your grandmother is competent and objects. She does, I said. Good, Patricia replied. Then the issue becomes narrative. I frowned. Explain. Courts are human systems, she said. Who looks reasonable? Who looks difficult? Who looks like they're acting out of love versus control? I'm guessing I don't automatically win that one, I said. Patricia didn't sugarcoat it. Not when it's a mother and son versus a daughter. I let that settle. So we counter with facts, I said. And consistency, she replied. No emotional outbursts, no family history speeches. We stay narrow. That night, Daniel texted me. Mom says you're threatening legal action. Please don't do this. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back. I'm correcting a legal problem, not threatening anything. His reply came fast. You're embarrassing us. There it was again. Not Eleanor. Not the truth. The image. I didn't respond. Over the next week, things escalated quietly. Karen stopped returning my messages altogether. Instead, updates came through Daniel, filtered and vetted. She's tired. She's busy. She doesn't want stress. I watched from a distance as a new routine formed around Eleanor without me. Appointments scheduled without notice. Medication changes I learned about days later. Decisions presented as fates accompli. And then came the invitation. A family meeting. Sunday afternoon. Karen's house. Daniel framed it as a peace offering. Mom just wants to talk. No lawyers. That alone told me everything. No, I replied. If she wants to talk, she can call me. She's trying to fix this, Daniel said. She's trying to control the optics, I said. I went anyway. Not because I trusted them, because I wanted to see how far they'd go. Karen's house looked the same as it always had. Immaculate. Neutral. A space designed to reflect order. She greeted me with a tight smile. Daniel hovered near the kitchen. We're worried about you, Karen said once we sat. I'm worried about Eleanor, I replied. She's fine, Karen snapped, then caught herself. She's stable. You filed an emergency petition, I said. That suggests otherwise. Daniel jumped in. We did what we thought was best. You did what was fastest, I said. Karen leaned forward. You're not the only one who cares about her. I didn't say I was, I replied. I said you excluded me. Karen sighed. You always make things about control. I almost laughed. Control looks like filing paperwork without notifying an interested party, I said. Not asking questions. Karen's eyes hardened. You think you're smarter than us. I think I'm more careful, I said. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. Enough. You're acting like this is some kind of betrayal. It is, I said. Karen stood abruptly. You're going to ruin this family. I met her gaze. You already did. Quietly. The meeting ended shortly after. No resolution, no apology. Just an unspoken understanding that this had crossed a line. 2 days later, I received notice of the hearing date and a copy of an amended filing. Karen had added a clause. If Natalie Brooks interferes with guardianship proceedings, her involvement will be deemed disruptive to the ward's well-being. They were preparing to label me a problem. That night, I sat at my desk and stared at the sentence until it lost meaning. This wasn't about guardianship anymore. This was about erasure, about reframing my competence as instability, about turning my insistence on inclusion into evidence against me. I picked up the phone and called Patricia. "They're escalating," I said. "I know," she replied. "I saw the amendment." "What's next?" I asked. Patricia paused. "Next, we stop reacting." "How?" I asked. "We go on record," she said, "formally, publicly, calmly." "And if they push back harder?" I asked. "They will," she replied. "Because people who benefit from silence don't surrender it easily." I hung up and looked at the calendar. 2 weeks until the hearing. 2 weeks until a judge would decide whose version of reality held weight. Karen and Daniel thought this was a family dispute. They thought they could manage it behind closed doors. They hadn't realized yet that once something moves into the legal system, intent stops mattering. Evidence does. And I had more of it than they knew. The first letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, slipped under my apartment door while I was at work. Certified. Return receipt requested. I didn't open it right away. I recognized the envelope type, the stiffness of it, the faint indentation where a law firm logo pressed against the paper from the inside. Karen Brooks had finally hired an attorney. I made coffee first, sat at the table, then opened it. The letter was polite, almost warm. It informed me that Karen Brooks, acting in what she believed to be the best interests of Eleanor Whitman, requested that I cease all actions that could be interpreted as interference in ongoing guardianship proceedings. It suggested, gently, that further involvement on my part might be emotionally destabilizing for Eleanor. Emotionally destabilizing. That phrase again. Soft, vague, weaponized. I read it twice, then set it aside and went to work. At the office, my day unfolded like any other. Meetings, reports, risk assessments. I signed off on a corrective action plan for a clinic that had misreported patient data. I explained, calmly, how intent didn't change outcome when regulators got involved. I realized, somewhere between the third email and the fourth meeting, that my family was making the same mistake that failing organizations always did. They assumed proximity meant immunity. They believed love would override process. By noon, Patricia Hale had already seen the letter. "They're laying groundwork," she said over the phone. "Not strong groundwork, but groundwork." "For what?" I asked. "To paint you as a problem if you don't back off," she replied. "Which means you don't back off." That afternoon, we filed our response. Not aggressive, not accusatory. A formal notice asserting my standing as an interested party. Attached copies of Eleanor's directives. A request for the court to hear directly from Eleanor regarding her preferences. Everything was factual, clean, boring. Exactly the opposite of what Karen expected. 2 days later, Daniel called again. This time, his voice shook. "You hired a lawyer," he said. "So did Mom," I replied. "She didn't want it to go this far." "She took it this far when she filed without me," I said. "You're tearing this family apart," he snapped. I waited a beat. "No, I'm refusing to disappear quietly." He hung up on me. That evening, I visited Eleanor again. This time, Karen was there. She stiffened when she saw me, then plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said, "I didn't know you were coming." "I didn't tell anyone," I replied. Eleanor looked between us. "Good. We can talk then." Karen's jaw tightened. We sat in Eleanor's room. Karen perched on the edge of the chair, hands folded tightly in her lap. Eleanor leaned back in her recliner, composed. "Natalie tells me you filed papers without her," Eleanor said. Karen sighed dramatically. "Mom, we've been over this. It was an emergency." Eleanor turned to her. "What was the emergency?" Karen hesitated. "Your health." "In what way?" Eleanor asked. Karen glanced at me, then away. "You're older. Things can change quickly." "That applies to everyone," Eleanor said, "including you." Silence fell. "Natalie," Eleanor continued, "what do you want?" I answered carefully. "I want transparency. I want inclusion. And I want your wishes followed." Karen stood. "This is unfair. You're ganging up on me." Eleanor's voice hardened. "No, you're being questioned." Karen looked at me, eyes sharp. "You always had to prove something." I met her gaze. "I'm proving it with evidence." Karen left shortly after, claiming a headache. After she was gone, Eleanor reached for my hand. "She thinks I'm weak," she said quietly. "She thinks you're convenient," I replied. Eleanor nodded. "Then it's time to remind her I'm still here." The following week, Eleanor agreed to a formal capacity evaluation, not because she doubted herself, because she understood optics better than Karen did. The doctor was thorough. Cognitive testing, memory recall, scenario-based decision-making. At the end, he smiled. "Mrs. Whitman, you're sharper than most people I see half your age." The report was filed with the court. Karen's attorney objected, weakly. Then came the emails from extended family, aunts, cousins, people who hadn't called me in years, suddenly concerned about my aggressive behavior. Karen was mobilizing her network. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I added their messages to my growing file. Because patterns matter. A week before the hearing, Patricia called me late. "They filed another motion," she said. "What now?" I asked. "They're requesting sole permanent guardianship," she replied, "and they're citing family consensus." I laughed once. Short, dry. "They're panicking," I said. "Yes," Patricia replied, "which means we're close." The night before the hearing, I sat alone in my apartment, reviewing documents one last time. I wasn't nervous. I was focused. This wasn't about winning. It was about making it impossible for them to pretend I didn't exist. The judge would hear from Eleanor. The judge would see the filings. The judge would see the timeline. And Karen Brooks would have to explain, under oath, why she thought she could decide who mattered and who didn't. As I turned off the light, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You should think about what you're doing. Families remember who hurts them." I deleted it. Because some families remember who refuses to stay silent. And tomorrow, silence was no longer an option. The courthouse smelled like old paper and disinfectant. The kind of place where time slowed, whether you wanted it to or not. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to watch who came in and how. Karen Brooks arrived 10 minutes later with her attorney, a man named Stephen Mallory. Mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of confidence that comes from believing familiarity will do most of the work for him. Daniel Brooks followed a few steps behind, shoulders tight, eyes already scanning for me. He didn't wave. He didn't look relieved to see me. He looked angry that I was there at all. Patricia Hale joined me at the bench near the wall. She carried a slim folder, nothing dramatic. She nodded once when she saw Karen. "They're expecting emotion," Patricia murmured. "We're giving them structure." The hearing room was small. No jury, just a judge, a clerk, and a handful of chairs, arranged in a way that suggested intimacy while guaranteeing exposure. Judge Raymond Klein entered without ceremony. Late 60s, wire-rimmed glasses, expression permanently neutral. He took his seat and looked at the file. "This concerns the guardianship of Eleanor Whitman," he said. "Temporary authority has been granted. Today we determine whether that authority becomes permanent." Karen straightened in her chair. Stephen Mallory stood first. "Your Honor, my client, Karen Brooks, has acted swiftly and responsibly to protect her mother during a period of declining health." "Objection," Patricia said calmly. "Assumes facts not in evidence." Judge Klein nodded. Sustained. "Mr. Mallory, stick to what you can prove." Mallory adjusted. "Mrs. Brooks and her son, Daniel Brooks, have been providing care and oversight. They believe continued guardianship is necessary for stability." Judge Klein turned to Karen. "Mrs. Brooks, do you believe your mother is incapable of making her own decisions?" Karen hesitated. "I believe she's vulnerable." "Answer the question," the judge said. Karen swallowed. "Not incapable, but influenced." Judge Klein made a note. Patricia stood. "Your Honor, we request the court hear directly from Eleanor Whitman." Karen's head snapped up. "That's unnecessary." Judge Klein looked at her. "I'll decide what's unnecessary." Eleanor was brought in slowly, cane tapping against the floor. She wore a navy cardigan and looked annoyed rather than frail. When she was sworn in, she met the judge's eyes without hesitation. "Mrs. Whitman," Judge Klein said, "do you understand why you're here?" "Yes," Eleanor replied. "Because my daughter thinks I can't be trusted with my own life." Karen's face flushed. "That's not what I said." "You didn't have to," Eleanor said evenly. Judge Klein raised a hand for silence. "Mrs. Whitman, Did you consent to the guardianship petition filed by your daughter and grandson? No, Eleanor said. I was informed after the fact. Did you want Natalie Brooks involved in decisions about your care? The judge asked. Yes, Eleanor said immediately. She's been involved for years. Karen leaned forward. Mom, you said she was busy. Eleanor turned to her. You said she was busy. The distinction landed hard. Patricia entered the capacity evaluation into evidence. Judge Klein skimmed it, then looked up. Mrs. Whitman, he said, this report indicates no cognitive impairment. That's correct, Eleanor said. Judge Klein turned to Mallory. Mr. Mallory, why was an emergency petition filed? Mallory cleared his throat. Out of an abundance of caution. Judge Klein frowned. Caution doesn't excuse exclusion. Daniel finally spoke. We were trying to help. Judge Klein looked at him. By removing an interested party? Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Karen's voice broke. I was trying to keep things together. Judge Klein leaned back. Families often say that when what they mean is control. The room went still. I'm denying the request for permanent guardianship, Judge Klein said. The temporary order is vacated. Decision-making authority returns to Mrs. Whitman. All future actions require her consent and full notification of all listed parties, including Natalie Brooks. Karen slumped back in her chair. Daniel stared at the floor. Outside the courtroom, Karen turned on me. You humiliated me, she hissed. I looked at her. You did that yourself. This isn't over, she said. I nodded. No, it isn't. Eleanor took my arm as we walked out. Her grip was firm. They showed their hand, she said quietly. Now you need to be ready for what they'll do next. I believed her. Because people who lose control don't stop. They escalate. And as we stepped into the sunlight, I knew this victory wasn't the end. It was the moment they realized I wasn't bluffing, which meant the next move would be uglier and far more personal. Karen Brooks didn't speak to me for 3 days after the hearing. That silence was deliberate, strategic. Karen had always understood that withdrawal could be more punishing than confrontation. When I was younger, she used it after arguments, after disappointments, after any moment where I stepped outside the role she preferred. I recognized it immediately. Daniel tried to fill the gap. He called the next morning, voice careful, as if he were walking through glass. Mom's not doing well. I'm sure, I replied. She feels blindsided, he said. She filed legal documents behind my back, I said. That's not being blindsided, he sighed. You didn't have to embarrass her like that in court. I almost laughed. Court isn't a stage, Daniel. It's a record. That quieted him. Then he tried a softer angle. Maybe we all just need some space. That's what I've had my whole life, I said. You're just noticing now. He hung up without another word. The retaliation didn't come loudly. It came administratively. On Monday morning, Eleanor's assisted living facility called to inform me that my access badge had been deactivated. When I asked why, the receptionist sounded uncomfortable. Mrs. Brooks requested changes to the approved visitor list, she said. She's listed as primary family contact. I closed my eyes. Did Eleanor authorize that? There was a pause. We were told she was aware. She wasn't. When I arrived later that afternoon, security stopped me at the door. I asked for the administrator. Her name was Linda Carver, a woman in her 40s who had always been friendly but distant. Karen Brooks called this morning, Linda said quietly once we were alone. She said you were causing distress. I kept my voice level. Did she provide documentation? No, Linda admitted. But family disputes make residents anxious. Eleanor requested I be notified of all decisions, I said. That's in her file. Linda shifted uncomfortably. We're just trying to avoid conflict. That's not your job, I replied. Your job is to follow directives. I called Eleanor from the lobby phone. She answered on the second ring. Natalie, she said. Why aren't you upstairs? They blocked me, I said. What? Her voice sharpened. Put me on speaker. I did. This is Eleanor Whitman, she said. Why is my granddaughter being denied access? Linda paled. Mrs. Whitman, we were informed. You were misinformed, Eleanor snapped. Restore her access immediately, or I'll involve my attorney. It took 10 minutes, but the message was clear. Karen was no longer arguing in court. She was going around it. That night, Eleanor insisted we review her documents again. All of them. Her will, her trusts, her beneficiary designations, her healthcare proxy. That was when I noticed something new, a recent change to her financial accounts. 3 months earlier, Karen Brooks had been added as a co-signer on one of Eleanor's investment accounts. Not power of attorney, not trustee, co-signer. Did you approve this? I asked. Eleanor frowned. She said it was for emergencies. Did she explain what authority that gave her? I asked. Eleanor shook her head slowly. No, I pulled the statements. Transactions were small but consistent. Transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Always under $5,000. Always spaced out. Avoiding triggers. This isn't caregiving, I said quietly. This is siphoning. Eleanor stared at the numbers. I trusted her. I know, I said. That trust had been weaponized. I called Patricia Hale immediately. This just became financial exploitation, Patricia said after reviewing the documents, which changes everything. How? I asked. It gives us leverage, she replied. And it gives Eleanor protection. The next day, Karen called me. Her tone was different, controlled, but tight around the edges. You went through Mom's finances, she said. Yes, I replied. That was inappropriate, she snapped. So was adding yourself to her account without explanation, I said. Silence. You're twisting things, Karen said finally. No, I replied. I'm documenting them. You think this makes you righteous, she said. But all it does is prove you've always been against me. I let that sit. This isn't about you. Her voice rose. Everything is about me. I carried this family. You controlled it, I said. That's different. She hung up. 2 days later, Eleanor received a notice from her bank requesting confirmation of recent account activity. Karen had tried to move more money. The bank had flagged it. That was the moment the situation crossed a line Karen couldn't talk her way out of. Patricia filed a formal complaint, not a lawsuit, a report, to the bank, to Adult Protective Services, to the court. Every step measured. Every claim supported. Eleanor signed everything herself. Karen Brooks was contacted by an investigator that afternoon. She called Daniel. Daniel called me. What did you do? He demanded. I stopped her, I said. You're destroying her, he said. No, I replied. I'm stopping her from destroying Mom. You always wanted this, he accused. To take her place. I looked out my window at the quiet street below. I never wanted her place. I wanted mine. That evening, Eleanor sat beside me, hands folded. She won't forgive you, she said. I don't need her forgiveness, I replied. I need her to stop. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then you need to be ready. For what? I asked. For the moment she realizes she's losing, Eleanor said. Because that's when people tell the most dangerous lies. I believed her. Because Karen Brooks had lost control of the court. She was losing control of the money, which meant the next thing she would try to control was the story. And stories, when weaponized, could ruin lives long before the truth caught up. I opened my laptop and began preparing for that, too, because I knew exactly what came next. And this time, I wouldn't be caught off guard. The story broke on a Thursday afternoon, just after 3. I didn't see it online. I heard it in my supervisor's voice. Natalie, she said, standing in my office doorway, tone careful in a way that immediately told me something was wrong. HR needs to speak with you. I followed her down the hall without asking questions. I already knew. Karen Brooks had always understood timing. She waited until she couldn't control the court, the money, or Eleanor directly. Then she went after the one thing she thought I couldn't afford to lose, my credibility. In the HR conference room sat a man I'd never met before, and a woman I had. The woman was Claire Benton, head of compliance oversight for our network. She looked uncomfortable. The man introduced himself as Thomas Reed, an external investigator. We've received a concern, Thomas said, hands folded, about a potential conflict of interest involving your family situation and your professional role. I nodded once. Go on. He slid a printed email across the table, anonymous. It alleged that I was abusing my position and legal knowledge to intimidate an elderly family member and retaliate against my mother for personal reasons. It suggested I was emotionally unstable, obsessed with control, and using my expertise to manipulate outcomes outside of work. Karen's fingerprints were all over it. This email also references a complaint filed with Adult Protective Services, Thomas continued. Can you explain that? Yes, I said calmly. With documentation, I opened my folder. Not metaphorically. Literally. I had prepared for this. I laid out the timeline, the guardianship filing, the court ruling, the financial irregularities, the bank flags, Eleanor's signed statements, Patricia Hale's correspondence. Every action tied to process, not emotion. Claire Benton watched quietly, eyes moving from document to document. At no point, I said, did I act in a professional capacity on behalf of my employer. I acted as a family member, responding to legal and financial exploitation, as defined under California law. Thomas Reed looked up. You anticipated this? I anticipated escalation, I replied. People who lose control often attempt character assassination. The meeting ended an hour later. Thomas thanked me for my cooperation. Claire stayed behind. I'm sorry, she said quietly. This shouldn't have reached this point. It was always going to, I replied. That night, the calls started. Extended family, old family friends, even a former neighbor from my childhood. Everyone had heard a version of the story. That I was unstable, that I was power-hungry, that I was trying to punish my mother, that I'd turned on my family. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I made a list, not of names, of statements. Because the smear campaign followed a pattern. Karen framed herself as the caretaker, Daniel as the mediator, me as the disruptor. She used the same phrases repeatedly. She's always been intense. She doesn't know when to let things go. She's confused work with family. She's punishing me, as if accountability were cruelty. Eleanor heard some of it too. One afternoon she called me, voice steady but sharp. Your mother called your cousin, she said. Told her you're trying to have me declared incompetent. That's the opposite of what's happening, I said. I know, Eleanor replied, but she's telling it loudly. That was the danger. Lies didn't need to be precise. They needed to be repeated. 2 days later, Karen made her boldest move yet. She filed a restraining order request, not against Eleanor, against me. The claim stated that my involvement was causing her emotional distress, and that my presence at Eleanor's residence was disruptive to family harmony. Family harmony, a phrase with no legal meaning and enormous emotional weight. Patricia called me as soon as she saw it. She's desperate, she said, and reckless. Does it have a chance? I asked. No, Patricia replied, but it will force a hearing, and that's what she wants. What does she want from the hearing? I asked. To make you look dangerous, Patricia said. Publicly, I closed my eyes. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Karen would get her stage, but she wouldn't control the script. The day before the hearing, Eleanor asked me to come early. She was sitting at her table with a stack of papers neatly arranged. I made copies, she said, of everything. She handed me letters, emails, notes she had written over the past year, observations about Karen's behavior, about Daniel's passivity, about moments where she felt pressured or rushed. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to lose my family, Eleanor said. But I think I lost it anyway. You didn't lose it, I said. You outgrew their control. She smiled sadly. You always were the one who saw it. The hearing was held in a different courtroom. Civil, not probate. Karen sat across from me, eyes red, posture fragile. Daniel sat behind her, jaw clenched. When it was her turn to speak, Karen cried. She spoke about stress, about betrayal, about feeling attacked by her own daughter. I don't recognize her anymore, she said through tears. She's cold, calculating. She's punishing me for trying to help my mother. The judge, a woman named Teresa Alvarez, listened carefully. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rebut emotionally. I stated facts. I have never threatened my mother, I said. I have never restricted her access to anyone. I have advocated for her autonomy. I have followed the law. I submitted Eleanor's statements, the bank records, the court ruling. Judge Alvarez reviewed them quietly. Miss Brooks, she said to Karen, this appears to be retaliation. Karen shook her head. I'm afraid of her. The judge looked at her steadily. Fear doesn't excuse false claims. The request was denied, firmly. Outside the courtroom, Karen didn't look at me. Daniel did. You didn't have to destroy her, he said. I met his eyes. I didn't destroy her. I stopped covering for her. He looked away. That night, the HR investigator emailed me. The complaint had been closed. Unfounded. No action required. I sat at my kitchen table long after reading it, the room quiet around me. Karen had lost the court. She had lost the money. She had lost the story, which meant the only thing she had left was denial. And denial, when it finally collapses, takes everything with it. Eleanor called me before bed. "She's going to come for me next," she said. "No," I replied. "She won't." "Why not?" Eleanor asked. "Because there's nothing left to take," I said. And for the first time since this began, I believed it. But belief didn't mean it was over. It meant we were approaching the point where the truth could no longer be contained. And when that happened, the fallout wouldn't be quiet. It would be irreversible. Karen Brooks didn't come for Eleanor next. She came for the house. I found out on a Monday morning when Eleanor called me, her voice unusually tight. "Natalie," she said, "did you know your mother tried to list my house for sale?" I closed my eyes. No. But I'm not surprised. The house sat on a quiet street in Modesto, the same one Eleanor had lived on for over 40 years. She'd paid it off decades ago. It wasn't just property, it was proof of independence. Karen had contacted a local realtor, claiming she had authority to prepare a preliminary valuation. She hadn't signed a listing agreement, but she'd taken the first step, testing the door. She said it was to prepare for the future, Eleanor told me, as if the future were something she owned. That afternoon, Patricia Hill confirmed what we already suspected. Karen had no legal authority to sell the house. None. But the attempt mattered. "It shows intent," Patricia said. "And it shows persistence." That word stayed with me. Persistence. Karen wasn't acting impulsively. She was acting systematically, trying one angle after another, assuming something would eventually stick. That assumption had protected her for years. But systems fail when people start documenting them. Eleanor insisted on acting immediately. Not emotionally, practically. Within 48 hours, she executed a new set of documents. A revised power of attorney naming me exclusively. A living trust placing the house and remaining assets under structured protection. A letter of intent explaining her decisions in her own words. She dictated it slowly, clearly. "I am not incapacitated," Eleanor said as I typed. "I am choosing autonomy." When we finished, she leaned back and exhaled. "I should have done this sooner." "You did it when it mattered," I replied. Karen found out 2 days later. She didn't call me. She showed up at Eleanor's door. I wasn't there, but Eleanor told me everything afterward. Her voice steady, observant, as if she were reporting weather. "She came in crying," Eleanor said. "Sat right where you usually sit." "What did she say?" I asked. "That you turned me against her," Eleanor replied. "That I was being manipulated. That I was throwing away my family." "And?" I asked. "And I told her she'd confused access with ownership," Eleanor said. I smiled, despite myself. Karen had responded the only way she knew how. By reframing herself as the victim of a conspiracy she couldn't admit was real. "She asked me to choose," Eleanor continued, "between you and her." My chest tightened. "What did you say?" "I said I wasn't choosing," Eleanor replied. "I was deciding." That distinction mattered. Karen left after that. No shouting, no scene, just a door closing. The next escalation came quietly. Daniel stopped calling, not in anger, in withdrawal. Weeks passed. No updates. No attempts to mediate. No more carefully worded pleas to keep the peace. When I finally heard from him, it wasn't directly. It was through Eleanor. "He came by yesterday," she said. "Didn't tell you?" "No," I replied. "He asked if I was happy," Eleanor said. I told him yes. I waited. "He asked if I missed how things used to be," she continued. I told him no. Daniel hadn't asked about me. That told me everything. At work, things settled. The HR investigation closed formally. My supervisor apologized, awkwardly, for the stress. I accepted it without comment. The system had worked. That was enough. But something else shifted. Colleagues started confiding in me more. Quietly, carefully. One afternoon, Claire Benton stopped by my desk. "You know," she said, "people notice how you handle pressure." "Pressure reveals process," I replied. She nodded. Exactly. That was when I realized this hadn't just changed my family dynamics. It had changed how I saw myself. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. Karen tried one final maneuver before winter set in. She sent Eleanor a letter, handwritten, pages long, apologies woven tightly with accusations, regret mixed with blame, love framed as entitlement. Eleanor read it once. Then she handed it to me. "Keep it," she said, "in case I forget who she is when she's being sincere." I placed it in my file, because sincerity, when it appears only after consequences, is still a tactic. By December, the extended family had gone quiet. No more concerned messages. No more rumors reaching my phone. The story Karen had tried to spread hadn't taken root. It lacked one crucial thing: evidence. On Christmas Eve, Eleanor and I had dinner together. Simple. Soup and bread. The television murmuring softly in the background. "Do you regret it?" she asked me suddenly. "What?" I said. "Not backing down," she replied. I thought about the clerk at City Hall. The letters, the hearings, the lies. "No," I said. "I regret how long I believed silence was kindness." She nodded. "That's the lie that teach girls first." That night, as I drove home through quiet streets lit with holiday lights, I felt something close to peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was hidden anymore. Karen had no authority. Daniel had chosen distance. Eleanor had reclaimed control. And I had learned something essential. The most dangerous moment in any toxic dynamic isn't confrontation. It's when the person who is meant to disappear refuses to. Because once that happens, the system has to either change or collapse. And I could feel it now. The collapse wasn't loud. It was settling. And it was almost complete. The letter from Adult Protective Services arrived the first week of January. Not an accusation. Not an investigation. A closure. I recognized the language immediately. Allegations reviewed. No evidence of abuse or neglect by Natalie Brooks. Matter resolved. Karen Brooks's last formal weapon had failed. I printed the letter and placed it in the file, behind the bank statements and ahead of Eleanor's revised trust documents. The order mattered to me. It told a story without needing explanation. Eleanor read it once, nodded, and handed it back. "Good," she said. "Now we can stop living defensively." That sentence changed how the next months unfolded. We didn't retreat. We didn't hide. We didn't wait for the next strike. We normalized. Eleanor resumed her routines. Hair appointments, weekly lunches with friends, book club on Thursdays. She told people what had happened, in her own words, without bitterness, without drama. "I had to remind my daughter that I'm still an adult," she said to one friend, smiling politely. Some people confuse care with control. The phrasing spread, not as gossip, as fact. Karen tried to counter it quietly. She attended church more often, volunteered, positioned herself as misunderstood, hurt, displaced. But something had shifted. People were listening differently now because Eleanor was speaking. And when the person at the center of a supposed crisis looks calm, capable, and clear-eyed, the narrative collapses. The real turning point came in February. Eleanor asked me to drive her to her bank branch in person. Not to sign anything urgent, just to talk. The branch manager, a woman named Denise Alvarez, greeted Eleanor warmly. They had known each other for years. "I wanted to thank you," Eleanor said, settling into the chair across from her, "for catching what didn't look right." Denise smiled carefully. "It's our job." "And I wanted to clarify something," Eleanor continued, "so there's no confusion." Denise nodded and pulled up the account history. Eleanor looked at her steadily. "My daughter, Karen Brooks, does not have permission to access my finances in any capacity. That won't change." Denise documented it thoroughly, added notes, added flags. Then she looked at me. "Miss Brooks, if you ever need confirmation of this conversation, I'll provide it." That was the moment I understood something important. Karen hadn't just lost control. She'd lost credibility. At home, Daniel remained silent until he didn't. One afternoon, he showed up unannounced at Eleanor's door. I wasn't there, but Eleanor told me about it later, her voice thoughtful rather than angry. "He asked if I was afraid," she said. "Of what?" I asked. "Of being alone," Eleanor replied. "And?" I said. I told him I was lonelier when people spoke over me than I ever am now, she said. Daniel had sat quietly after that, longer than usual. He asked if you hated him, Eleanor added. I closed my eyes. What did you say? I said hate requires attention, Eleanor replied. And you're done paying that cost. That night, Daniel texted me. Just one message. I don't know how to fix this. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back. You don't fix it. You learn from it. He didn't reply. Spring came early that year. Eleanor's health remained steady. Stronger, if anything. Autonomy does that to people. In March, Karen made one final attempt at reconciliation. She asked for a meeting. Neutral location. Coffee shop. No lawyers. Eleanor considered it, then declined. She doesn't want to talk, Eleanor said. She wants absolution. I didn't argue. The next escalation came from a place Karen hadn't anticipated. Extended family. An aunt called Eleanor directly, asked questions, real ones, listened. Then another. Then a cousin. Karen's version of events didn't hold up under scrutiny when Eleanor was available to contradict it calmly. The isolation Karen had used on others quietly returned to her, not as punishment, as consequence. One afternoon, while helping Eleanor organize old photographs, I came across a picture I hadn't seen before. Karen and Daniel as children. Eleanor behind them, hands resting lightly on their shoulders. The look on her face wasn't proud, it was watchful. She knew, I said quietly. Eleanor nodded. I just didn't act soon enough. You're acting now, I said. She smiled faintly. Because you showed me how. That admission stayed with me, not because it felt triumphant, because it felt heavy. I had spent years believing my role was to stabilize others, to absorb, to accommodate. Now I understood something different. Boundaries teach, even when they cost. By April, the legal dust had settled completely. No open cases, no pending motions, no appeals. Karen Brooks was out of options. She didn't disappear, but she stopped advancing. And in systems like ours, that's the same thing. One evening, as I drove home from Eleanor's, I realized something else. I hadn't checked my file in weeks, not because I was avoiding it, because I didn't need it anymore. The story no longer lived in documents. It lived in outcomes. Eleanor had her autonomy. Karen had her distance. Daniel had his reckoning. And I had something I hadn't expected when this began. Quiet. Not the oppressive kind. The earned kind. The kind that comes when you no longer need to prepare for the next blow. But even then, I knew the story wasn't finished. Because when control fails, people often retreat into denial. And denial has a way of resurfacing when the stakes shift again. Eleanor's birthday was coming in May. 88 years. Karen would notice. And birthdays have a way of drawing lines people pretend not to see. I didn't know what Karen would do, but I knew this. Whatever came next would not be about documents. It would be about legacy. And this time, Eleanor intended to choose it herself. Eleanor Whitman turned 88 on a Saturday. She didn't want a party. No banners, no speeches, no carefully staged reconciliation attempts disguised as celebration. I want lunch, she said, with people who show up without conditions. So we planned lunch. A small private room at a restaurant she liked in downtown Modesto. Nothing trendy. White tablecloths, soft light, familiar waitstaff who remembered her order without asking. She invited 4 people. Me. Her friend, Lillian Moore, who'd known her since their 30s. Her neighbor, Samuel Ortiz, who checked on her every morning without being asked. And Margaret Ellis, her former accountant, who had quietly warned her years ago to watch how much authority she handed over to family. Karen Brooks was not invited. Daniel Brooks was not invited. Eleanor made that decision herself, and she made it without anger. They don't know how to sit in a room unless they're directing it, she said. I'm tired. The lunch was exactly what she wanted. Calm, warm, grounded. No one talked about guardianship or court or money. They talked about gardening and travel and books they'd never finished. Eleanor laughed more than I'd heard her laugh in months. For a few hours, the past lost its grip. Then, as we were finishing dessert, the restaurant manager approached our table. There's a woman at the front asking to join your party, she said gently. She says she's family. Eleanor didn't look surprised. She folded her napkin slowly and set it on the table. That would be my daughter, she said. Please tell her no. The manager hesitated. She seems upset. I'm sure she is, Eleanor replied. But this is not a public event. The manager nodded and walked away. Lillian reached for Eleanor's hand. Are you okay? Yes, Eleanor said. Because I chose this. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Karen. I didn't answer. Another message came through. How could you do this to me on my own mother's birthday? I watched Eleanor sip her coffee, unbothered, unhurried. This wasn't something being done to Karen. This was something no longer being done for her. That evening, Karen sent a long email to extended family. I received it because someone forwarded it to me, not because she included me. In it, she wrote about heartbreak, about exclusion, about how children turn against parents when they are influenced by outsiders. Outsiders. That word had followed me my entire life. I didn't respond. Neither did Eleanor. Silence, in this case, wasn't avoidance. It was refusal. 2 days later, Eleanor called me early in the morning. Natalie, she said, I want to finalize something. I drove over immediately. She was already dressed, documents spread neatly across the table. My estate attorney, Jonathan Pierce, is coming this afternoon, she said. I asked him to prepare an amendment. I didn't ask why. I already knew. Jonathan Pierce arrived precisely on time. Gray-haired, precise, calm. He spoke to Eleanor directly, not through me, not through assumptions. I want my wishes clear, Eleanor said. Not interpretable. Jonathan nodded. Then we'll make them explicit. The amendment was simple. Eleanor reaffirmed her trust structure. Assets divided as she saw fit. Medical and financial authority consolidated. And one additional clause. Any party who attempts to contest, manipulate, or override these decisions forfeits their interest entirely. A no contest clause. Jonathan looked at her. Are you certain? Eleanor didn't hesitate. Yes. Karen Brooks had mistaken patience for weakness. Daniel Brooks had mistaken silence for consent. Neither of them understood what happens when an observant woman decides she's done explaining herself. When Jonathan left, Eleanor sat quietly for a long moment. She's going to be furious, she said. I know, I replied. She'll say you did this, Eleanor continued. I know, I said again. Eleanor looked at me then, eyes sharp despite the years. You didn't ask me to do this. No, I said. I didn't. And yet, she said, you gave me the courage to. That was the sentence that stayed with me. Not because it felt like vindication, because it felt like responsibility. Karen found out a week later. Not from us. From her attorney, who called Eleanor's office to inquire about possible changes. Jonathan Pierce declined to discuss details, citing client confidentiality. That was enough. Karen showed up at Eleanor's assisted living facility the next day. This time, security didn't stop her. Eleanor asked to see her. I wasn't present. But Eleanor told me exactly what happened. Karen came in angry. She left quiet. She asked if I loved her, Eleanor said. I said yes. She asked if I trusted her, Eleanor continued. I said no, Karen cried. Not theatrically, not strategically. For the first time, genuinely. But even genuine tears don't reverse consequences. She asked if this was permanent, Eleanor said. And? I asked. I told her it was structural, Eleanor replied, which is more permanent than emotion. Karen didn't argue after that. She left without another word. Daniel called me that night. I think Mom finally understands, he said. I didn't respond immediately. Understanding, I said finally, is not the same as accountability. He was quiet. I don't know where that leaves me. You decide, I replied. That was the last conversation we had. As spring turned to early summer, Eleanor settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Not defensive, not reactive. She had her independence. I had my life back. The file stayed closed in my desk drawer, not because the past was forgotten, because it no longer needed management. But something had shifted, permanently. Karen Brooks had lost her position as decision-maker. Daniel Brooks had lost his default role as intermediary. And Eleanor Whitman had reclaimed authorship of her own ending, which meant the next chapter wouldn't be about conflict. It would be about aftermath. About what happens when control fails, and everyone has to live with who they actually are. And I was ready for that, too. After Eleanor's birthday, the world didn't explode. That was the strangest part. No dramatic confrontations, no public scenes, no final letters demanding forgiveness or threatening estrangement. Life simply recalibrated. Karen Brooks stopped calling, not angrily, not theatrically. She stopped because there was nothing left to negotiate. For the first few weeks, I kept expecting something: a surprise visit, a message from an unknown number, another attempt to pull the story back under her control. That vigilance took time to fade. It always does when you've spent years bracing for impact, but nothing came. Instead, something quieter took its place. Space. Daniel Brooks faded differently. He didn't cut contact all at once. He sent occasional neutral updates, a photo of his dog, a comment about work, small gestures that felt like placeholders rather than connection. I responded politely, briefly, without inviting anything deeper. Distance, I learned, doesn't have to be hostile to be firm. At work, my life began to feel surprisingly light. The investigation was long closed. The whispers had stopped. If anything, my handling of pressure had changed how people interacted with me. Not warmer, clearer. I was asked to lead a new internal review committee focused on ethical decision-making and reporting channels. The irony wasn't lost on me. I accepted the role because it felt aligned, not because it felt redemptive. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Eleanor noticed the change in me before I did. One afternoon, while we were sitting on her patio, she looked at me over her tea and said, "You're not carrying it in your shoulders anymore." "Carrying what?" I asked. "The vigilance," she replied. "The need to be ready." I thought about that later, driving home. She was right. For most of my adult life, I had lived as if calm were temporary, as if peace were something that could be revoked at any moment if I didn't manage it carefully enough. Now, peace felt durable. Not because nothing could go wrong, but because I knew I could respond without losing myself. Extended family interactions became rare. When they happened, they were cautious, polite. No one asked invasive questions anymore. No one tried to pull me aside to suggest compromise. The story Karen had tried to tell had nowhere to land. It didn't match reality. People sense that more than they admit. One evening in early June, I received a handwritten note in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Karen. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the table and let it sit there for 2 days. Not as punishment, as choice. When I finally read it, it was shorter than I expected. She wrote about confusion, about feeling replaced, about not recognizing how things had gone so far. There was no apology. There was also no accusation. It was the closest she'd ever come to neutrality. I didn't respond, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because response would have implied a negotiation that no longer existed. Eleanor asked me about it once. I told her the truth. She wrote, I said. I didn't answer. Eleanor nodded. That's an answer. By midsummer, Eleanor began talking about the future in a way she hadn't before. Not with fear, with intention. She updated her advanced care directives again. Not because anything had changed medically, because she wanted clarity. I don't want decisions made in a panic, she said, or in guilt. We reviewed everything together. Slowly, thoughtfully. She asked for my input. Not as authority, as perspective. That distinction mattered. One afternoon, as we were sorting through old documents, Eleanor paused and held up a photograph. It was me, at 12. Sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by notebooks, helping her organize receipts. You were always good at seeing what mattered, she said. Even when you were little. I smiled. I just liked order. No, she replied. You liked fairness. That word stayed with me. Fairness isn't loud. It doesn't demand applause. It just refuses to bend for convenience. Karen never regained her old footing. She wasn't shunned. She wasn't attacked. She simply wasn't centered anymore. And for someone who had lived her life believing centrality was love, that absence was devastating. Daniel, eventually, stopped reaching out too, not with anger, with resignation. I think, in his own way, he finally understood that neutrality had been a choice all along, and that choices have consequences. The last time I saw him was at a grocery store near Eleanor's house. We made eye contact down an aisle. He hesitated, then nodded. I nodded back. We didn't speak. That felt right. By the time fall approached again, the file in my desk drawer had grown dusty. I hadn't opened it in months. Not because I was avoiding it, because I didn't need it. The story was no longer unfolding. It had settled. One evening, Eleanor and I sat watching the sun dip low, the light stretching long across her garden. "Do you feel like you lost a family?" she asked suddenly. I thought carefully before answering. "No," I said. "I feel like I stopped pretending I had one version, when I actually had another." She smiled. "That's honesty." "What about you?" I asked. She leaned back. "I feel lighter and older. In the right way." I drove home that night with the windows down, the air cool and steady. For the first time, I wasn't replaying conversations in my head. I wasn't anticipating arguments. I wasn't rehearsing explanations I'd never be allowed to finish. I was just present. The crisis that had once consumed everything had narrowed into something manageable, contained, resolved. All that remained now was meaning. Not the kind that needs to be declared, the kind that settles quietly into how you live. One chapter remained, not to confront anyone, not to justify anything, but to name, clearly and without bitterness, what this had taught me, and how I intended to live because of it. Eleanor Whitman passed away quietly the following spring. Not suddenly, not in pain, just finished. She had been clear about how she wanted it handled. No open-ended decisions, no room for interpretation. Her instructions were followed exactly, down to the music played softly in the room during her final hours. I was there. I held her hand. I told her she was safe. I told her she had done well. She smiled once, faintly, and then she was gone. Grief did not arrive as chaos. It arrived as weight. Manageable, honest, earned. The will was executed 2 weeks later. Jonathan Pierce handled everything. There were no surprises for me, because Eleanor had never hidden her intentions. Her estate was distributed precisely as outlined in the trust. Charitable contributions, modest allocations to extended family, clear boundaries. Karen Brooks received a small inheritance, contingent on non-contestation. She did not contest it. Daniel Brooks received nothing. That wasn't punishment. That was consequence. Eleanor had written a letter to be read privately by each recipient. Jonathan asked if I wanted mine delivered separately. "No," I said. "I'll read it when I'm ready." I waited until I was alone. "Natalie," she wrote, "you didn't save me. You reminded me I was allowed to save myself. That matters more than you know. Live like you never need permission again." That was all. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Karen didn't attend the private memorial Eleanor requested. She sent flowers. White. Generic. Signed simply, Daughter. Daniel didn't come either. The people who showed up were the ones Eleanor had chosen. Lillian. Samuel. Margaret. A few neighbors. A few friends. No tension. No performance. Just remembrance. Afterward, I went home and opened the desk drawer. The file. I flipped through it slowly. Bank records, court documents, letters. Evidence of a fight that had once consumed everything. Then I closed it, and I threw it away. Not because it didn't matter, because it had already done its work. In the months that followed, my life didn't transform dramatically. I didn't relocate. I didn't reinvent myself. I didn't seek closure conversations or public validation. I just lived differently. I stopped explaining my boundaries. I stopped translating my decisions into language others could tolerate. I stopped mistaking endurance for love. When people asked about my family, I told the truth without detail. We're not close. That sentence no longer carried shame. It carried accuracy. Karen never reached out again. Daniel didn't either. Their silence wasn't peace, but it wasn't my burden anymore. What I learned through all of this wasn't about revenge in the way people imagine it. There was no dramatic takedown, no moment where everyone clapped. Revenge, if you want to call it that, came quietly. It came from refusing to disappear, from insisting on truth without shouting, from allowing consequences to stand without rescuing anyone from them. The tables didn't turn overnight. They simply stopped being tilted. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been told to stay quiet to keep the peace, or felt erased by people who should have protected you. You're not alone. You're allowed to choose yourself. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, told without excuses or noise, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay with me. Some stories don't end in reconciliation. They end in self-respect. And sometimes that's the cleanest ending there is.